The year was 2247, and humanity had finally reached the stars. It had taken centuries of struggle, war, and hard work. Humans had built colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. They had learned to travel faster than light just 15 years ago. Now their ships explored distant solar systems, searching for new worlds and new resources. Admiral Daniel Carter stood in the United Earth Command Center in Geneva, Switzerland. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 40 years in military service, and he thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. The massive screen in front of him showed reports from exploration vessels scattered across nearby star systems. Everything seemed normal. Scientists were studying new planets. Engineers were building mining stations on asteroids. It was a good day. Then every screen in the room went dark. "What happened?" Carter demanded. "Get those systems back online." Lieutenant Amy Walsh worked frantically at her station. "Sir, it's not just us. We're getting reports from everywhere. Every communication device on Earth just shut down. Phones, computers, satellites, everything." Before Carter could respond, the screens came back to life. But they no longer showed human data. Instead, they displayed an image that made everyone in the room stop breathing. It was an alien. The creature was massive, at least 3 meters tall. Its body was covered in dark purple scales, and it had 6 arms that moved constantly as it spoke. Its head was elongated, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. When it opened its mouth, rows of small, sharp teeth were visible. The alien spoke. And somehow, everyone understood its words perfectly, as if the meaning was being placed directly into their minds. Species designation, human. I am High Arbiter Zolveth of the Galactic Council. We have observed your expansion into space. We have assessed your civilization. We have made our decision. Admiral Carter felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. He had always wondered if humanity was alone in the universe. Now he had his answer, and he did not like it. The alien continued speaking. The Galactic Council has governed the known galaxy for 40,000 years. We are a coalition of over 300 spacefaring species. All intelligent life falls under our authority. There are no exceptions. In homes and offices around the world, 8 billion humans watch the same broadcast. Parents held their children close. Soldiers gripped their weapons. Scientists stared in disbelief. No one spoke. As per Article 17 of the Galactic Compact, the High Arbiter announced, newly discovered civilizations must submit tribute to the Council. This tribute ensures peace and stability throughout the galaxy. It is not negotiable. Admiral Carter finally found his voice. What kind of tribute? The alien's 4 eyes focused on something beyond the camera. 60% of your planetary resources will be collected. Additionally, 20% of your population will be taken for service to the Council. You have 1 standard cycle to prepare. This equals approximately 90 of your Earth days. The room erupted in chaos. Officers shouted in disbelief. Someone dropped a coffee cup, and it shattered on the floor. Admiral Carter raised his hand for silence, but it took almost a minute for the noise to die down. "And if we refuse?" he asked. For the first time, something like amusement crossed the alien's face. No species has ever refused. In 40,000 years, not one civilization has been foolish enough to reject the Council's authority. "That's not an answer," Carter said firmly. The High Arbiter leaned closer to the camera. "The consequences would be complete and total erasure. Your cities would be reduced to ash. Your people would be scattered to the void. Your planet would be stripped of all resources and left as a dead rock floating in space. Your species would be forgotten as if you never existed." The transmission showed images now. Worlds burning, cities crumbling, species that had tried to resist, reduced to nothing but historical records in Council archives. The message was clear. You have 90 days, the High Arbiter said. Use them wisely. The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one in the command center moved. Then Secretary General Lisa Monroe's face appeared on the main screen. She was broadcasting from the United Nations headquarters in New York. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. Admiral Carter, I'm convening an emergency session of the World Council. We need you here within the hour. Understood, Madam Secretary, Carter replied. He turned to his staff. Lieutenant Walsh was crying silently at her station. Colonel Nathan Price stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists. Others looked lost, confused, afraid. Listen to me, Carter said loudly. I know what you're feeling. I feel it too. But we don't have time for fear right now. We need information. I want everything we have on this Galactic Council. I want our best scientists analyzing that transmission. I want to know how they hijacked our systems. I want options. Colonel Price stepped forward. Sir, if what they showed us is true, what options do we have? Their technology is thousands of years beyond ours. Their fleet probably numbers in the thousands. What can we possibly do? Admiral Carter looked at the younger man. I don't know yet, but I know one thing. Humanity didn't claw its way out of the caves and across the stars just to become slaves. We'll find a way. He walked toward the exit, then stopped and turned back. Get me everything on human military history. Every war we've ever fought, every time we faced impossible odds. Every time someone told us we couldn't win and we won anyway. If we're going to have this conversation, we need to remember who we are. As Carter left the command center, the weight of the moment pressed down on him. 90 days. That was all humanity had to decide its fate, submit and survive as slaves or fight and risk extinction. Outside, the sun was setting over Geneva. The sky was painted in shades of orange and red. People on the streets were staring at their phones, talking in hushed voices. Some were crying, some were praying, some were already arguing about what to do. Admiral Carter looked up at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, alien ships were waiting. An empire that had ruled for 40,000 years expected humanity to kneel. He thought about his daughter, who lived on the Mars colony with her 2 children. He thought about his father, who had died fighting in the last war on Earth before the nations finally united. He thought about every human who had ever lived and died, building the civilization that now faced its greatest test. 90 days, he said quietly to himself. Let's see what we can do with 90 days. He climbed into the waiting transport and headed for New York. The fate of humanity was about to be decided, and he intended to be there when it happened. 3 weeks had passed since the alien transmission, and Earth had changed completely. In every city, people argued in the streets. Some carried signs that said, "Survival first," and demanded that humanity accept the tribute. Others held banners reading "Freedom or Death" and called for resistance. Fights broke out between the 2 groups. Police struggled to maintain order. The world was tearing itself apart from the inside. Admiral Daniel Carter had not slept more than 4 hours a night since the transmission. He sat now in a secure bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by the best minds humanity had to offer. The bunker had been built 100 years ago to survive nuclear war. Now it served as the planning center for a very different kind of conflict. We've analyzed the transmission completely, said Dr. Samantha Rivera, head of the Xenoanthropology Division. She was a small woman with dark hair and sharp eyes. She had spent her entire career preparing for the possibility of alien contact. She never imagined it would happen like this. She pulled up a holographic display showing everything they had learned about the Galactic Council. The Council controls approximately 60% of the known galaxy. They've been in power for over 40,000 years. Their technology is advanced, but here's the interesting part. She zoomed in on a chart showing technological development over time. Their technology stopped advancing about 8,000 years ago. They reached a certain level and just stopped. No new weapons, no new ships, no innovation at all. Colonel Nathan Price leaned forward. He was a veteran of the Mars colonial wars, a brutal conflict fought 20 years ago when the Mars colonies tried to break away from Earth. His face was scarred and his left eye was artificial. Why would they stop advancing? Because they didn't need to, Dr. Rivera explained. When you rule everything and no one challenges you, what's the point of building better weapons? They got lazy, they got comfortable, and that might be their weakness. Secretary General Lisa Monroe spoke from the head of the table. That's an interesting theory, but it doesn't change the basic facts. They have thousands of warships. We have maybe 300. They've conquered hundreds of species. We've never fought anyone except ourselves. Actually, Admiral Carter said quietly, that might be our advantage. Everyone turned to look at him. He stood and walked to the holographic display. Dr. Rivera, bring up the records of every species the Council has encountered. The display filled with images and data. Species after species appeared, showing their first contact with the Council and their subsequent submission. Carter studied each one carefully. Do you see it? He asked. Colonel Price shook his head. See what? Look at their first contact protocols. Every single time the Council shows up with overwhelming force, delivers the tribute demand, and the species immediately surrenders. There's no negotiation, no resistance, nothing. Dr. Rivera's eyes widened. They've never actually had to fight for it. Exactly, Carter said. Their entire empire is built on fear. They show up, they look scary, and everyone gives up. But what happens when someone doesn't give up? What happens when someone actually fights back? Secretary General Monroe frowned. We get destroyed, that's what happens. You saw those images, entire civilizations wiped out. Did we? Carter asked. Or did we see images that they wanted us to see? Think about it. If no species has ever resisted, where did those images come from? Either they're fake, or they're from so long ago that no one remembers the truth. The room fell silent as everyone considered his words. Dr. Rivera pulled up more data. He might be right. We've been analyzing their fleet deployments based on the transmission data. Their ships are spread across 300 systems. If they had to concentrate everything on one target, they'd have to leave dozens of worlds undefended. Which means they can't afford a long war, Colonel Price said slowly. If other species see them struggling against us, those species might start getting ideas. Admiral Carter nodded. That's exactly what I'm thinking. The Council's power isn't based on military strength alone. It's based on the belief that resistance is impossible. If we can break that belief, everything changes. Secretary General Monroe held up her hand. This is all very interesting, but we're still talking about fighting an enemy with vastly superior technology and numbers. Even if they're overconfident, even if they haven't fought in centuries, they still have weapons that can destroy cities from orbit. I'm not saying we can win a straight fight, Carter admitted. I'm saying we don't have to. We just have to make them afraid that we might. A young officer named Lieutenant Kevin Douglas spoke up for the first time. He was barely 30 years old, but he had one of the sharpest minds in the military. Sir, are you suggesting we bluff them? Carter smiled grimly. I'm suggesting something more than a bluff. I'm suggesting we show them exactly who they're dealing with. Every other species they've encountered has been peaceful. They've been explorers, scientists, traders. They looked at the Council's fleet and saw certain death. But we're different. He brought up images from human history, wars spanning centuries, weapons of mass destruction, soldiers charging into certain death for abstract concepts like honor and freedom. We've spent our entire existence fighting each other, Carter continued. We've developed weapons specifically designed to cause maximum destruction. We've killed more of our own kind than any alien ever could, and most importantly, we have examples throughout our history of small groups fighting to the death against overwhelming odds. Dr. Rivera nodded slowly. And we celebrate those moments. We build monuments to them. We teach our children about them. Exactly, Carter said. The Council has never encountered a species that would rather die than surrender. They have no idea how to handle that, and that's what we're going to show them. Secretary General Monroe looked around the room. Every face showed a mixture of fear and determination. This was madness, and everyone knew it. But it was also their only real option. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Admiral Carter took a deep breath. "When their deadline arrives, we don't submit. We don't negotiate. We don't beg for mercy. We give them a single word, and then we make sure they understand what that word means." Colonel Price stood up. "And what word is that?" Carter looked at him with eyes that had seen too much war and too much death, but still held a spark of defiance. "No." The word hung in the air like something dangerous. Secretary General Monroe was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. "If this fails, we all die. You understand that, not just the soldiers? Everyone, every man, woman, and child on Earth, every colony in the solar system." "I understand," Carter replied. "But if we surrender, we lose everything anyway. Our freedom, our future, our humanity. At least this way we go down fighting, and who knows, maybe we won't go down at all." Monroe looked at each person in the room. Scientists, soldiers, politicians, all of them were scared. All of them wanted to live, but all of them also knew that some things were worth dying for. "Very well," she said finally. "We have 67 days until the deadline. Let's use them wisely." As the meeting ended and people filed out, Admiral Carter remained behind. He stared at the holographic display showing the Council's fleet strength. Thousands of ships. Weapons that could crack planets open. An empire that had endured for 40,000 years. Against that, humanity had 300 ships, a handful of nuclear weapons, and an attitude problem. Carter smiled to himself. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. He reached out and touched the display, zooming in on Earth. 8 billion people, all counting on him to find a way. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's give them something to be afraid of." The Nexus of Order was the largest space station in the galaxy. It had been built 40,000 years ago as the seat of power for the Galactic Council. Its metal corridors stretched for thousands of kilometers. Its great chambers could hold millions of beings. For countless generations, it had been the center of everything. Today, the Grand Assembly Hall was full. Representatives from 300 species filled the tiered seating that rose high above the central platform. They had come from every corner of the galaxy to witness what they believed would be a simple formality. Another primitive species bowing to the inevitable. High Arbiter Zolveth stood on the central platform, his 6 arms folded behind his back. His purple scales gleamed under the artificial lights. He had held his position for over 200 years, and he had seen dozens of species submit to the Council. Each time was the same: fear, denial, and then acceptance. It was the natural order of things. "The deadline approaches," announced Delegate Crixon of the Vorthani hegemony. He was a serpentine creature, nearly 10 meters long, coiled around his designated seating area. "These humans have been silent for days. Perhaps they have simply accepted their fate." "They are primitive," agreed Ambassador Yelmira of the Celestine Collective. She appeared as a column of shimmering light, her true form too complex for physical manifestation. "Their technology is barely capable of reaching their nearest stars. They cannot possibly believe resistance is an option." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The 300 species represented here had all submitted to the Council in their time. They saw no reason why humans would be any different. The strong ruled the weak. That was the way of the universe. A chime sounded, indicating an incoming transmission. "Attention!" announced the communication system. "The human delegation is responding." The massive holographic display above the central platform flickered to life. A single figure appeared, standing alone in what appeared to be a military command center. He wore a simple uniform decorated with medals and insignia that meant nothing to the assembled aliens. His gray hair was neatly combed. His eyes were steady. It was Admiral Daniel Carter. High Arbiter Zolveth raised his ceremonial staff. "Human representative, you stand before the Galactic Council. 300 species bear witness to this moment. The tribute has been demanded. The deadline has arrived. How does your species respond?" Admiral Carter said nothing. He simply stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, looking directly into the transmission array. Seconds ticked by. The assembly began to grow restless. "Perhaps they are experiencing technical difficulties," someone suggested. "Perhaps they are too afraid to speak," another replied. Then Admiral Carter opened his mouth. "No." One word, spoken quietly but clearly. It took a moment for the translation systems to process it, and then another moment for the meaning to sink in. Confusion swept through the assembly. Delegates looked at each other, uncertain if they had heard correctly. No species had ever refused the tribute. The word itself seemed impossible. High Arbiter Zolveth's 4 eyes narrowed. "You must have misunderstood the situation. Refusal is not an option. Submit to the tribute or face the consequences." Admiral Carter's expression did not change. "I understood perfectly, and my answer remains the same. No." Delegate Crixon uncoiled slightly, his serpentine body tensing with agitation. "This is absurd. Does this human not understand what he is doing? Does he not understand who we are? We have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours," Ambassador Yelmira said, her light pulsing with anger. "We have erased species from existence. What makes you think you can defy us?" Admiral Carter smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind of smile that made several delegates instinctively move backward in their seats. "You ask what makes us think we can defy you," he said slowly. "Let me answer that question." The holographic display expanded, showing images from human history. Soldiers charging across battlefields, cities burning, weapons of incredible destruction being deployed against other humans. War after war after war. "For as long as our species has existed," Carter continued, "we have been at war, not with aliens. With ourselves. We have fought over land, over resources, over ideas. We have developed weapons specifically designed to kill as many of our own kind as possible." The images shifted. Nuclear explosions, chemical weapons, biological agents. The council delegates watched in growing horror. "During what we call the Cold War, our 2 greatest nations pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to destroy our entire planet dozens of times over, and for decades we lived with the knowledge that any day could be our last, not because of alien invasion, because we might decide to end ourselves." High Arbiter Zolveth's scales had turned a darker shade of purple. "This is madness." "Yes," Carter agreed. "It is. But that madness is part of who we are. You've spent 40,000 years conquering species who valued survival above all else. Species who looked at your fleet and calculated the odds and decided surrender was the logical choice." He stepped closer to the transmission array. His eyes seemed to burn with an intensity that made even the ancient High Arbiter uncomfortable. "We are not logical. We are not reasonable. Throughout our history, we have examples of small groups fighting against impossible odds, choosing death over submission. We celebrate these moments. We teach our children to admire those who died fighting rather than live on their knees." The assembly hall had gone completely silent. Not a sound could be heard from 300 species. "You wanted us to be afraid," Carter continued, And we are. We're terrified. But here's what you don't understand about humans. Fear doesn't make us surrender. Fear makes us dangerous. He paused, letting his words sink in. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your tribute demand. You're going to leave humanity alone. And in return, we won't broadcast your demands to every species under your control. We won't teach them what we've learned. We won't show them that resistance is possible. Delegate Crixon hissed loudly. You threaten us? You, with your tiny fleet and primitive weapons, dare to threaten the Galactic Council? Admiral Carter's smile widened. I'm not threatening you. I'm educating you. You've built your empire on the assumption that no one would ever fight back. But now someone has. And once one species says no, others will start wondering if they can too. High Arbiter Zolveth gripped his staff so tightly that his scales cracked. If you refuse the tribute, we will destroy you. Every city on your planet will burn. Every human will die. Maybe, Carter replied calmly. But you'll have to fight for it. Every city, every colony, every ship. We won't make it easy. We won't make it cheap. And while you're busy trying to exterminate us, what do you think the other 300 species will be doing? He looked directly at the assembled delegates. Many of them looked away. Some of you were conquered long ago, Carter said. Some of you barely remember what freedom felt like. But you're watching this right now, and you're wondering something. You're wondering if maybe you could say no too. The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one in the Grand Assembly Hall moved. The silence was absolute. 300 species, thousands of delegates, all trying to process what they had just witnessed. Then, the chaos began. Delegates shouted over each other. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for caution. A few quietly slipped away from the assembly, already thinking about what the humans' words meant for their own people. High Arbiter Zolveth stood motionless on the central platform. In 200 years, he had never seen anything like this. A single primitive species had just shaken the foundations of an empire that had stood for 40,000 years. And all it took was one word. No. In the days that followed humanity's refusal, the Galactic Council fell into chaos. Emergency sessions were held every few hours. Delegates argued endlessly about how to respond. Some demanded immediate military action to make an example of the humans. Others urged caution, worried about what such a war might cost. A few even suggested negotiation, though they were quickly silenced. High Arbiter Zolveth retreated to his private chambers in the highest level of the Nexus of Order. For the first time in 200 years, he was uncertain. The human admiral's words echoed in his mind constantly. Once one species says no, others will start wondering if they can too. The High Arbiter ordered every intelligence agency in the Council to gather information on humanity. He wanted to know everything: their history, their culture, their military capabilities, their weaknesses. If the Council was going to destroy this species, they needed to understand what they were dealing with. 3 weeks later, Analyst Vortek of the Crethani Intelligence Bureau stood before the Council's inner circle. The Crethani were a race of information gatherers, with large heads designed to process vast amounts of data. Vortek had spent his entire life studying alien civilizations, but nothing had prepared him for what he had found. Distinguished leaders, he began, his voice trembling slightly, I have completed my analysis of human civilization. What I have discovered is deeply disturbing. High Arbiter Zolveth leaned forward. Tell us, what are we dealing with? Vortek activated his data display. Images and text filled the air around him. Humans evolved on a planet with extreme conditions. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, ice ages. They should have gone extinct many times, but they survived. More than survived. They adapted. They spread across their entire planet. living in every possible environment from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. Many species have survived difficult origins, Delegate Crixon said dismissively. That doesn't make them special. With respect, Delegate, that is only the beginning. Vortek pulled up new images. Unlike most species in the Council, humans never formed a single unified society. For most of their history, they have been divided into thousands of competing groups. These groups have been in almost constant conflict. The display showed wars across human history, ancient battles with swords and spears, modern wars with tanks and aircraft. The sheer number of conflicts was staggering. They have a concept they call mutually assured destruction, Vortek continued. During what they call the Cold War period, two of their most powerful nations each built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their entire planet many times over. They pointed these weapons at each other and lived like this for decades. Ambassador Yelmira's light flickered in confusion. Why would any species do such a thing? Because neither side was willing to back down, Vortek explained. They would rather risk total extinction than appear weak. This mindset appears repeatedly throughout their history. He brought up more examples. Small groups of humans fighting vastly superior forces, soldiers refusing to surrender even when defeat was certain, entire cities destroyed rather than captured. They have a phrase for this behavior, Vortek said. They call it rather die standing than live on your knees. They have monuments and holidays celebrating those who chose death over submission. They teach their children to admire these individuals. High Arbiter Zolveth felt a cold sensation spreading through his body. He had lived for centuries. He had seen dozens of species join the Council. None of them had been like this. There is more, Vortek said, his voice dropping. Their methods of warfare are unlike anything we have encountered. They have developed weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering, chemical agents that destroy the lungs and skin, biological weapons that spread disease, devices that split atoms themselves, releasing energy equivalent to small stars. These are the weapons of madness, Crixon said. Yes, Vortek agreed. But that is precisely the point. They are not fully rational. They do not always choose the logical path. They make decisions based on emotion, on pride, on anger. They are capable of doing things that make no strategic sense simply because they refuse to quit. He paused, letting his words sink in. Perhaps most concerning is their adaptability. When faced with challenges, they innovate at a rate we have never seen in any other species. During their largest global conflict, they went from propeller aircraft to nuclear weapons in less than 10 years. Their technology advances rapidly precisely because they are constantly fighting and constantly need new advantages. High Arbiter Zolveth stood up. Enough. We have thousands of warships. They have hundreds at most. Whatever their psychology, they cannot win against superior numbers and technology. Vortek nodded slowly. That is true, High Arbiter. We would almost certainly win a direct war. But at what cost? Our analyses suggest that defeating humanity completely would require at least 60% of our combined fleet. The campaign would take years. Our losses would be enormous. And during those years, Ambassador Yelmira said quietly, our other territories would be undefended. Precisely, Vortek said. The human admiral was correct about one thing. Our empire is built on the assumption that no one resists. If we become tied down in a long war with humanity, others will notice. Others will wonder. The inner circle fell silent. Each member was thinking the same thing. For 40,000 years, the Council had maintained control through fear and the appearance of invincibility. But appearances could shatter, and once broken, they could never be fully restored. Finally, Delegate Crixon spoke. What of their other claim? They said they would broadcast our demands to our subject species. Have they done so? Vortek's expression became even more grave. They have. Within hours of their refusal, transmissions began reaching every corner of our territory. They included full copies of the tribute demands and recordings of the human admiral's response. "What has been the reaction?" Zolveth demanded. "On the surface, nothing yet. But our intelligence networks have detected significant increases in encrypted communications among multiple species. Resistance movements that we thought were extinct are showing signs of activity. Some of our governors report strange behaviors among their populations." Vortek pulled up a final piece of data. "Most concerning is this. A single word has begun appearing on walls, in messages, in whispered conversations across dozens of worlds." The word appeared on the display in dozens of different alien scripts. "No." High Arbiter Zolveth stared at the display for a long time. He thought about the empire he had served his entire life. He thought about the billions of beings living under council rule. He thought about 40,000 years of history, all suddenly at risk because one small species had refused to be afraid. "Leave me," he said finally, "all of you." The inner circle filed out of the chamber. Vortek was the last to go. At the door, he paused. "High Arbiter, may I offer one final observation?" Zolveth waved his hand tiredly. "Speak." "Throughout my analysis, one pattern became clear. When humans are pushed into a corner, when they believe they have nothing to lose, they become more dangerous, not less. If we attack them, we may destroy their civilization. But we may also create exactly the kind of example that inspires others to resist." He left, and the High Arbiter was alone. Zolveth walked to the window of his chamber and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, on a small planet orbiting an ordinary sun, a species of primitive primates had just changed everything. For the first time in 200 years, he felt something he had forgotten was possible. Fear. 6 months had passed since humanity said no. Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the observation deck of the USS Defiance, the newest and largest battleship in Earth's growing fleet. Through the massive window, he could see dozens of human warships holding formation. Beyond them, at a respectful distance, a fleet of Galactic Council vessels waited. They were not attacking. They were not threatening. They were asking permission to approach. Colonel Nathan Price stood beside Carter, reading a report on his tablet. "The Vorthani hegemony has announced their withdrawing from 6 outer systems. The Celestine Collective is requesting asylum for 3 of their governors who publicly supported the tribute system. And the Crethani have sent another message asking about trade agreements." Carter nodded slowly. "What about the council itself?" "They've called 7 emergency sessions in the past month. Our intelligence suggests they're completely divided. Some want to attack us immediately. Others want to negotiate. A few are even talking about dissolving the council entirely." Dr. Samantha Rivera entered the observation deck, carrying a stack of documents. She looked exhausted but happy. "Admiral, you need to see this. We've been monitoring communications across council space. The resistance movements are growing faster than we predicted." She handed him a report. Carter read through it quickly. On dozens of worlds, beings were organizing. Some were openly protesting against council rule. Others were secretly building networks and stockpiling resources. All of them had one thing in common. They were no longer afraid. "The Zeloth Confederacy just announced they're refusing their next tribute payment," Rivera continued. "The council threatened them, but they held firm. They said if the humans could do it, so could they." Carter felt a strange mix of pride and worry. He had wanted to inspire others. He had not expected it to happen so fast. Lieutenant Kevin Douglas approached from the communications station. "Sir, Secretary General Monroe is requesting a conference call. She says the High Arbiter has formally requested a summit meeting." Carter raised an eyebrow. "A summit? After 6 months of silence?" Yes, sir. Apparently, they want to discuss terms. Carter and Price exchanged glances. This was unexpected. The Galactic Council had spent 40,000 years dictating terms to others. The idea of them asking for negotiations was almost unthinkable. "Tell the Secretary General I'll join the call in 5 minutes," Carter said. He turned back to the window. The alien fleet was still waiting, their ships dark against the stars. Each of those vessels had weapons that could destroy cities. Each of them had been built to enforce the Council's will across the galaxy, and now they were waiting for humanity to make a decision. "You know," Price said quietly, "when this started, I didn't think we had a chance. I thought you were leading us into certain death." Carter smiled slightly. "To be honest, I thought so too. I was just hoping we could make them hurt badly enough that they'd think twice about doing this to anyone else. Instead, we might have just ended their empire. Maybe. Or maybe we've just started something that will take decades to finish. Either way, things will never be the same." Carter made his way to the communications room, where Secretary General Monroe's face was already on the main screen. She looked tired, but determined. "Admiral, thank you for joining us. I've just finished preliminary discussions with High Arbiter Zolveth. He's willing to meet in person to discuss what he calls a new arrangement between the Council and humanity." "What kind of arrangement?" Carter asked. He wouldn't give specifics, but he made it clear that the tribute demand is being withdrawn. He also suggested that the Council might be interested in establishing diplomatic relations with Earth as an independent power. Carter considered this carefully. He's scared. They're all scared. 6 months ago, they were threatening to destroy us. Now they're asking to talk. Monroe nodded. "The question is, what do we want from these talks? We could demand independence and be done with it. Or we could push for more." "More meaning what?" "We could demand reforms, real changes to how the Council operates, protection for species that want to leave their control, abolition of the tribute system entirely." Carter thought about it. He thought about all the species living under Council rule. Billions of beings who had never known freedom. Beings who had been told for generations that resistance was impossible. "If we push too hard, they might decide to attack anyway," he said. "Desperate empires do desperate things." True. But if we don't push hard enough, nothing really changes. The Council adjusts, recovers, and goes back to business as usual. Colonel Price spoke up. "Sir, if I may, whatever we decide, we should remember why we started this. It wasn't just about humanity. It was about proving that submission isn't the only option." Carter nodded slowly. "You're right. Tell the High Arbiter we'll meet with him, but not on the Nexus, not on any Council station. We'll meet in neutral space, and we'll bring our own fleet." Monroe smiled. "I'll make the arrangements." The call ended, and Carter returned to the observation deck. The sun was rising over Earth's horizon, visible through the distant blue curve of the planet. It was a sight that never got old. Dr. Rivera was still there, reviewing more reports. "The latest analysis is interesting, Admiral. We're tracking at least 40 different resistance movements across Council space. They're not coordinated yet, but they're growing." "What's driving them?" Carter asked. "Hope," Rivera said simply. "For the first time in generations, they have proof that the Council can be challenged, that someone can say no and survive. That's more powerful than any weapon." Carter watched the sunrise for a long moment. 6 months ago, he had expected to die. He had expected humanity to be destroyed. Instead, they were here, alive and free, and the entire galaxy was changing around them. "You know what the hardest part of all this is?" he said quietly. Rivera looked at him. "What?" "It wasn't saying no. That was actually easy once we decided to do it. The hard part is what comes next, building something new, helping other species find their courage, making sure this all means something. He turned away from the window. But that's a problem for tomorrow. Today, let's just appreciate that we're still here. In the months and years that followed, humanity took its place among the stars, not as servants, not as conquerors, but as something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that stood up when everyone said they should kneel, a species that inspired others to do the same. The tribute system was abolished. The Galactic Council reformed into a genuine federation of equals. Species that had been enslaved for thousands of years finally knew freedom. It was not easy. There were setbacks and conflicts and moments when everything threatened to fall apart. But throughout it all, one thing remained constant. Whenever a species faced impossible odds, whenever a government tried to crush its people, whenever someone was told that resistance was futile, they remembered. They remembered the humans. They remembered the word. No. And they found the courage to say it themselves. Admiral Carter eventually retired to a small house by the sea on Earth. He spent his final years watching the waves and thinking about everything that had happened. Sometimes visitors came, reporters and historians who wanted to hear the story from him directly. They always asked the same question. How did he find the courage to stand against the entire galaxy? Carter would smile and look out at the ocean. It wasn't courage, he would say. It was stubbornness. Humans don't know when to quit. It's probably our greatest flaw. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's exactly what the universe needs. And somewhere out there, among the countless stars, beings of all shapes and sizes continued to learn the most important lesson humanity ever taught. That the most powerful weapon in the universe is not a fleet of warships or a planet-killing bomb. It is the simple, stubborn refusal to give up. It is the word no, and it can change everything.